Hello there, Marcus. I have your two sculpts loaded into ZBrush on my screen, and I just want to go through these and kind of do a little sculpt over and also address the questions that you had in your emails. And just looking at these, my first impression is that yes, you had a little bit of trouble controlling the form with this particular approach, and being the clay tubes approach. And I don't force people to use this approach. So if you're comfortable sculpting in another way, you're more than welcome to do that. But for me, it's actually the most fun way. It's the most creative way, and it's the most flexible and forgiving as well. It's just learning to balance clay tubes with a few other brushes to get the right tool for the right occasion. Specifically, when you're talking about getting interlocking, you're right, clay tubes kind of preferentially fills in gaps like this, right? Let me just store a morph target here. So typically, if I'm trying to get transitions between forms that I block in with clay tubes, I will use clay tubes to build the convexities either side. And then when it comes to actually interlocking them, say these two are merged, I just go to a standard brush. As easy as that, and really, I think I showed this in the brush video this first week, is with a standard brush, just pulling the focal shift to one side and then varying the size, you can quickly kind of push kind of a cavity in and have my intensity pretty low. You can quickly kind of get the forms really close to each other, and then I kind of will just kind of brush around the outside of the depression that I've created, taking care not to kind of step my clay tubes brush into it, right? Because then that will kind of fill in the cavity. Right, and again, the other thing you have to play with is the embed depth. So when you're getting to finer forms and more refinement and less volume creation, I'll often put my embed depth down to 5, and this is typically found in your brushes menu under depth. Right, I've just hotkeyed it to my pop-up palette. Okay, so that's typically how I'll start to refine forms once they're blocked in. Okay, so hopefully, after a little bit of experience, you can kind of get to grips with this kind of technique. But again, I don't prescribe it to everyone. If it works for you, great. Otherwise, use what you're used to. Okay, now on to your model. So the first thing that we have, and it's kind of been a common feature across many people's sculpts, is he's getting really wide at the top. And I think it's just kind of people naturally, character artists especially, tend to bulk things up a little bit too much, right? They don't typically know what natural is and what natural looks like. And it's not to say it's a bad thing, but even Michelangelo put extra musculature and volume in his stuff. So you're kind of in good company. But you have to know how to dial it back and kind of hit the realism and the naturalism when you need it. Okay, so what I'm doing here is I'm just going to try to pull in his wings. Pretty much his arms and his shoulders are just a little bit too wide through here, through the lats. And it might be a little transpose and a little move brush. Because in general, your guy gives the impression of width, whereas this guy's torso, it gives the impression of tall. You can see it in this view in particular. That is quite narrow everywhere, but quite tall. Okay, and so there's still the contours that you have, lats, external obliques, iliac crest, but they're more subtle than you've given them credit for. Right, so I'm just going to try to conform this a little bit with a move brush. And the same thing over here. I think if we kind of get back to that view down here, you'll see it's not quite that pronounced, all these things. Okay, so just a quick compare, pushing it a little bit closer. Now, when we get to the actual muscles, chest muscles look pretty good. I think you've done a pretty good job of getting them to flow out to the raised arms. But what I want to see is probably a little bit more refinement to the volumes. Right, really kind of get in there and define the planes that we're seeing. And you mentioned the clavicle and the raised arms in your email. Hopefully the week 2 lecture on scapulohumeral rhythm will address a lot of your questions on how this interacts on the raised arm. And I'm sure if not, I'll get some more questions from you next week. So really, all the stuff flowing out, this integrates into a common mass more or less as soon as it gets down to this section of the front deltoid slash pecs, right? This all kind of unifies and heads out. Likewise on this arm, front deltoid is going to be going like this. And again, we need to kind of just find out where we're going here. Like I see there's a lot of, it looks like you have an extra deltoid on here. One of these is the front head and one should be more of the medial head. All right, so I'll just bulk this one up a little bit and then try to redistribute some of this. You kind of have too much deltoid there. Okay, in this instance, just to show you kind of more of my workflow, this form that I'm creating, I don't want to just cross-hatch it to death but it just needs a little bit more convexity here. So I'm just going to go in with the standard brush, focal shift, and very light intensity. Essentially do what I would take a long time to build up with clay tubes. That's just to kind of put a very soft modification to the form in with standard brush. Okay, so you see I'm just unifying pecs and the deltoids out here. Okay, then I get the pecs to come across as well. A little bit more. Okay, so that's kind of it for the chest. As we go down, we want to look at the abs. The abs, I think your abs are just kind of they're not unified, right? You have all sorts of forms happening on there. And a little bit too much volume in most instances. And certainly he has definition and volume in his abs, but this particular pose he's stretched back. And so the convexities are quite a bit more subtle. And there's a little bit less of all these little things hopping off the edge. And we'll talk about these in a minute. These are essentially external obliques. All right, so let's just define the border of where external obliques would go. They're kind of going out here in various patterns, kind of jagged on its way up, right? You can kind of see it here, jagged on the way up, and jagged on the way up here as well. You have to be careful that you don't kind of mask or blur too much the difference between the forms of the abs and the external obliques. You have to really inspect closely what's happening in your reference. Again, keeping in mind that they live on different levels anatomically. External obliques live on the very superficial level, right on the surface, and they grab onto a big flat tendon that sits over the abs. So some of these forms that look like they're abs going crazy are simply forms of that tendinous sheet being pulled on by a little bit of the by the external obliques. Okay, so you really have to be careful not to make your abs look like they're going crazy and jumping off to the right, because in general the abs are going to descend in a line like this, right? And any small modifications have to be treated subtly to make it look convincing. Okay, look at this in this particular view. This one is blended together with this one, right? So even within the different packs of muscles, of ab muscles, there's often some distinction on how they look and how they blend together. Okay, so just kind of simply blending these things. Try not to over model this stuff, right? That's kind of what's happened here, is you've gone in and you've done too much. You've put too much detail in, and you've observed things like this little inflection here, a small, tiny shift in planes within the overall mass of this section of abs, but you've given it quite a bit too much, right? So you just have to be a little bit more subtle with your touch and look at which forms are the more important, the larger or the smaller ones. Okay, through here I'm seeing costal cartilage, right? And this is all kind of sitting underneath the external obliques and the abs, but it's just kind of pushing out a little bit in here. So you do it with build-up clay tubes, or you could do it with standard brush. Okay, let me just kind of... Alright, so one, this is all getting unified. The depth is still there, right? If I put my light up here, you'll still see we still have crazy definition in the abs at a kind of a glancing angle. It's just that you don't need massive depth to make things shadow. Okay, that's enough for that. Let's just look at everything else. For obliques, remember these are all flowing backwards like this. So just kind of unify them. Up here they start to interdigitate with the serratus, and I think you have some of that. Again, just be a little bit more careful with the modeling. So this looks like the fifth rib here. So the abs are just sitting kind of over top of this one, so you should have 3 underneath. And remember, these guys are going back to the scapula, the underside of the scapula, and they're what's creating this mass here. But I think you've given way too much volume in this area, right? You just simply have some lats going over top. But you have a lot of additional volume here that's unaccounted for. All right, so again, serratus coming down. That's cool. We like that. We like this line, but we need to blend it down. We need to make it natural. Okay. Let me just switch views around to the back. How about this one? So be careful, some of these lines, some of these are cast shadows in the image, right? You don't want to mistake those for too much depth, right? Notice the spinal volumes of spinal erectors on both sides. I think probably the better image for resolving this stuff is here. All right, look at these. So to get some form built up, I'll just go in with standard brush. And look at these big egg shapes either side. So this is the lateral mass of spinal erectors sitting in there like this. Going up, starting to diminish as they go up, and then sliding under the trapezius. Kind of merging with the central column up in here. Okay, as far as the trapezius go, too much right in here. I think probably you've misread a few things. So really the acromion is sitting right under, really apparent out here, that square. And this one is sitting under this wrinkle. Skin folds, acromion is going to be in there like that. Spine of the scapula is coming back kind of like this. You really have to observe what a scapula looks like. So probably dig up your anatomy book or go to Gray's Anatomy online and just really look at the curvature of the spine as it goes down, and you'll see some crazy shapes to it. We approximate it in the anatomy course with a straight line, but there's a little bit of subtlety to it when it comes to actually working with it. Okay, so anyways, spine of the scapula is going down like this. Medial border is coming off like this. And I think you're kind of close here. Rhomboid's coming back in. I just think these little striations are a little bit overmodeled. What's happening in here? Just a plane change from the rhomboids coming back like this, and the lats going over top of them. Right? This is a subtle thing. It's a very subtle thing. So you just have to be careful. Then all this kind of a mess in here, you know, kind of a mess. That's why things shouldn't be a mess like that. That's why I use the clay tubes, because the clay tubes totally unifies things to keep it from being a mess like that. Right? It just fills in all those little gaps that you have. Okay. And then down in here we have a little bit of fat. Right? You have the external obliques coming back up in here, and then you have a little fat pad covering up here and actually blending quite smoothly into the gluteal muscles. Okay, back to the traps as we work our way up. This all needs to be kind of unified, right? This is all, squash all that down. It's a nice flat tendinous area. 7th cervical vertebra right in the middle. You can see it popping out there. You have this top part of the trapezius working to pull the arm up, to elevate the arm. It's nice and tensed. This bit off of the scapula here is stretched. So that's a different plane. A little bit like that. And then you have the rest fairly accurately done. The tail coming down. Okay, so there's kind of a unified version of what you had. In general, I think you indicated most of the forms, but it just wasn't, it's just not tight, right? You just need to get in there and decide which are the important kind of anatomical considerations, and then the ones that create the big form, and then use those and subdue the smaller things that are less important. Again, that's something that comes with experience, of course. But that's why we're in this course. These little serratus in here are tough to get correct, but yours are a little stubby. I think in the video you can see me remodeling them about 3 or 4 times. Okay, that's not going to be 100% that, but that's give you the idea. Okay, you mentioned not seeing the acromion. The acromion is right in here. Big flat rectangle. It's hard to miss actually, but you have to know what you're looking for. So sitting right in here like so. Okay, and then deltoid coming off there. And then just really kind of take a little bit of the volume out of the rear head of the deltoid. It's stretched. That's what would be the infraspinatus. And just kind of unify this stuff out here. Okay, I think that's all I'm going to do for this one. I think that was kind of fairly comprehensive. Mostly it's proportions and controlling your brushes, right? And that's more or less what it comes down to. Controlling the brushes will come with time and practice, and proportions, again, will come with experience. And just kind of seeing and observing, which is again why we do these exercises, so they get better and better at looking at and deciding what are the important forms. Okay, let me just have a quick look at the female torso. I'm not going to go into the same depth at all as with this one, but the female torso is obviously still quite constructional and rough. Don't know if you saw the video about under your stroke turning your roll distance up on your clay tubes. If you do, it gets rid of all these little intermediate steps and gives you a nice smooth stroke, so you don't get all that nasty, jittery, scratchy feeling. So anatomically, I think on her, the important thing is getting the scapula working correctly out to the acromion, which would be right here. And on this side, again, spine of the scapula down, medial border, acromion out here, and then just really attending to how the trapezius sits into the spine of the scapula. And in general, the treatment of a female figure has to do with smoothness and softness, right? You really have to get into soft, round forms. You can get away with hard edge forms on a man and really square, angular planes, but on a woman you need to kind of make sure that they're round and smooth and less angular, even if it's still kind of constructional. You can see I'm just kind of putting this in. Now you did have one specific question about how do you distinguish between chest muscle and breasts, and let me just quickly go into that. I'm going to load the spotlight for this. Female figure week 1. And really it's almost, you almost have to work in 2 different instances. Do the chest muscles first almost, and then sculpt up the breasts. Right? She doesn't have very big breasts, so it's all about kind of getting the right planes established with the chest. So that's, again, same instance, same thing happening that we just saw in the other one. chest muscle going out to the outside of the humerus. Front deltoid up here, merging with the pecs going down. So all this kind of becomes unified. Gives you a nice little tube of muscle in here. So just make sure you have the little tube of muscle. And then that all fans out to go to its diverse origins, right? Clavicle, sternum, and then abdominal. So pretty much through here, up these areas that I've cross-hatched in already, that's pectoral muscle. And I don't think that's a surprise. But then breast tissue kind of hangs off the side. This little area down here is known as the axillary tail. This border that kind of acts the axilla is the armpit in anatomical terms. And so this kind of hangs off. You have a form up here of the edge of the pectoral muscles. And you have the form down here, which is the edge of the breasts. Okay, and then, yikes. As occasionally happens in ZBrush, things go crazy. Okay, and then just have to get, so you have obviously the round fullness down here. Just gonna get rid of the nipple as I cross-hatch this over. And then this is all just a smooth transition up here. Planar, a lot of kind of flatter surfaces up here. And then in here it starts to just do a nice gradual transition. Obviously bets are off if there's like fake boobs and things like that involved, which are horrible. But same thing applies, just have to find the boundaries. They're just quite a bit less natural. I didn't store a morph target, so we're out of luck for switching. I'll switch in a second though. I'll show you guys a trick that maybe you've used before, but if you haven't, everybody will see it. Okay, so that's one. On the far side, it's the same thing. You just have to find the limits of where the chest muscle goes, and it's probably to about right here. And then breast tissue kind of starts to transition over top of it. But you want to see a plane change between flat plane of pectoral muscle and upward, more upward facing plane of breast tissue. Okay. In this particular instance, you're in Dynamesh, okay, so I can't really step down and deflate this, but this one's quite a bit less voluminous than you have it here, so I'm just going to pop it in a little bit like that. Make it look a little bit more natural. Okay, then everything kind of converging out. Just like we've seen. Get some biceps. And if you want, you can do a standard brush to interlock them. Kind of dig the armpit in a little bit more. Okay, that's it for that. Hopefully that explains and maybe shows you a little technique for getting that transition. I'll just show you the differences in planes. Hopefully you can see that there's a nice transition between pectoral muscle here and the top face of the breast here. So let me just show you the trick for reverting this if you need to, or just if you want to put a morph target in that you haven't stored. So I'm going to store one. I'm going to export this as an OBJ. And as long as you're at the same level, you should be able to delete it, store it, import it back in. Actually, I've just done that incorrectly. Let me load up your original. So now I'll turn Dynamesh off, store morph targets, and import the OBJ we just exported. And Dynamesh isn't helping us because it's resizing these. But hopefully, even with the stroboscopic effect, you can see the difference. Actually, I'm going to try something really quick. Let's see if we do this, if anything's going to happen. If I go back to this one and I go to deformation and hit unify, okay, nothing happens. If I hit unify on this one, that's better. Okay, so that's essentially just put them into the same relative scale. And now you can see the different transitions. Important thing being the overlap here, pectoral muscle and axillary tail. And did we do anything here? We just kind of unified things a little bit. Made things a little more round down here. Okay, that's it, Marcus. I hope that's helpful. I'm going to put this one online for people to see as well, so everybody else that's watching this can learn from this review as well. And good luck with week number 2. See you soon.